الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله العظيم من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلن تجد له وليا مرشدا وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له له الملك وله الحمد يحيي ويميت وهو على كل شيء قدير وأشهد أن محمدا عبد الله ورسوله صلوات الله وسلامه عليه وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون يا أيها الناس اتقوا ربكم الذي خلقكم من نفس واحدة وخلق منها زوجها وبث منهما رجالا كثيرا ونساء واتقوا الله الذي تساءلون به والأرحام إن الله كان عليكم رقيبا يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وقولوا قولا سديدا يصلح لكم أعمالكم ويغفر لكم ذنوبكم ومن يطع الله ورسوله فقد فاز فوزا عظيما أما بعد فإن أصدق الحديث كتاب الله تعالى وخير الهدي هدي محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وشر الأمور محدثاتها وكل محدثة بدعة وكل بدعة ضلالة وكل ضلالة في النار ثم أما بعد. We begin by praising Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We seek His mercy and we seek His forgiveness. We seek our sustenance and our guidance from Him and from Him alone. And we send our peace and blessings upon His last and final messenger, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, upon his companions, on his family, and all those who follow him till the day of judgment. Allahumma ja'alna minhum. May Allah make us all from among them. Ameen ya Rabbil Alameen. My dear brothers and sisters, as we, as a Muslim community living in this country, for the majority of us, moving into the second and third phase of our existence in the Muslim community here, and moving into that second and third generation of Muslims who have grown up here and are born and raised in this country. It is always good at times to reflect a little bit on how we got here, on how we reached this stage, on whose shoulders we were carried to this point. Where do we get the inspiration to do all that we are doing? Where do we get the motivation, the inspiration to continue the work of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in a land that maybe 50 or 100 years ago, it could never have been imagined that the Muslim community would have grown to what it has grown to, walhamdulillah. And one of the things I just want to reflect on is, how far are we thinking? How far down the road are we looking? Because at some point, we always hear the stories, a few people came, they started in a house, they went to a bigger building, they rented, they finally bought. We all hear this story about that evolution of the Muslim community in this country. And obviously before any of that, it started with our African American brothers and sisters who came here against their own will, many of them Muslim, but their identity and their religion was stripped away from them. But the one thing that we really need to be focused on today is, how far down the road are we planning for? That is it just enough that I do my part so that me and maybe my family and close ones, that we are taken care of, but really how far down the road are we looking? And in the brief moments that we have, I want to just share a reflection from Surah Al-Baqarah, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, throughout this surah, He reminds us of many of the different Anbiya who have gone through certain types of tests and trials with their people, with their families, with trying to give da'wah and so on. And one of those stories that's highlighted is the story of Ibrahim alayhi salam. And when we talk about Ibrahim alayhi salam, there's many qualities that come into mind. He was one of those who's known for his willingness to sacrifice. He's one of those who stood against everyone in the community against shirk. He is the one who opposed even his own father when it came to, in a respectful manner, of course, of building idols, let alone worshipping idols. He was the one who left his family in the middle of a barren desert when he was ordered by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We know of many of these qualities of Ibrahim alayhi salam. But one thing that is highlighted in Surah Al-Baqarah, in one portion in particular, is his ability to have foresight. Is him being a visionary. And that's something that is usually not attached to him. But when you look at his life, how he thought, how he lived, how he practiced, Ibrahim alayhi salam was one of those people who taught us, before any of the modern day folks who talk about long-term planning and having a vision. It came from Ibrahim alayhi salam. And the perfect example is when Allah told him that you have passed the test. You have been accepted. All of those sacrifices paid off when Allah Azza wa Jalla says, وَإِذِ ابْتَلَى إِبْرَاهِيمَ رَبُّهُ بِكَلِمَاتٍ فَأَتَمَّهُنْ قَالَ إِنِّي جَاعِلُكَ لِلنَّاسِ إِمَامًا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that after all of those tests and trials that we have given you, and you obeyed every single time, never did he question, Ya Allah, this is my son. Never did he question, Ya Allah, it's my wife and son. How can I leave them in the barren desert? No. Allah says every single time we commanded, you obeyed. سَمِعْنَا وَأَطَعْنَا. Every single time. And you have passed the test. What is your reward? إِنِّي جَاعِلُكَ لِلنَّاسِ إِمَامًا. We will make you leader over all of mankind. Ibrahim alayhi salam, the leader of an ummah, all by himself, that was his reward. But the vision of Ibrahim kicks in with his response. What does he say? Does he say, Alhamdulillah, I made it? Does he say, thank God, all my hard work paid off? What is his response to Allah Azza wa Jal? قَالَ وَمِن ذُرِّيَّتِي. His answer is a question in a way. Ya Allah, what about my offspring? What about my children? And ذُرِّيَّتِي doesn't just mean, Ya Allah, what about my children? But it means, Ya Allah, what about my children and their children and their children and their children till the day of judgment? What about the generations to come? This is one man. He's also, along with those other titles, he's a father. He's also a family man. But his thinking is generations from now. That it's not enough, Ya Allah, that I make it. It's not enough that I built the masjid. It's not enough that I opposed shirk. It's not enough that I took your message and preached to the people. All of those monumental tasks. But it wasn't enough for him. قَالَ وَمِن ذُرِّيَّتِي. Ya Allah, what about them? قَالَ لَا يَنَالُ أَحْدِ الظَّالِمِينَ. My offer does not extend to the wrongdoers. There might be some from those generations, they don't deserve to be in that category. They don't deserve to even be considered from your generations. So it does not extend automatically to everyone. That we understand now. A few verses later, Allah Azza wa Jal, again He describes Ibrahim alayhi salam, but he's conversing with his family. And he's conversing with his children. And Allah tells us, recalls those moments. And the very intimate moments. And we should all, when we hear these verses, try to put ourselves in that place, in that position. وَوَصَّى بِهَا إِبْرَاهِيمُ بَنِيهِ وَيَعْقُوبُ يَا بَنِيَّ إِنَّ اللَّهَ اصْطَفَى لَكُمُ الدِّينَ فَلَا تَمُوتُنَّ إِلَّا وَأَنْتُمْ مُسْلِمُونَ. If you were, let me remind you of the time when Ibrahim, and then Allah mentions another great Anbiya, Yaqub alayhi salam, when they would gather their children around them. What kind of conversations would they have? What would they remind each other? See, today we talk a lot about the new wave problem. For me growing up in this country and working with youth, There were different issues, there were different problems and challenges. Many of the sins they may have been involved in, many of them had issues with drugs, with the opposite gender, with relationships with their parents maybe. Today we call it a new problem, the issue of challenging and questioning your faith. And it indeed is an epidemic. Many young Muslims leaving their religion, if not outwardly, at least inwardly, through conversations and through surveys, and we're finding out more and more Muslims are questioning their faith. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reminds us in the Quran, this is not a new problem. That even the prophets of Allah, the Anbiya of Allah, would gather their children and they would remind them what? إِنَّ اللَّهَ اصْطَفَى لَكُمُ الدِّينَ فَلَا تَمُوتُنَّ إِلَّا وَأَنْتُمْ مُسْلِمُونَ. Allah has chosen for you this religion. Do not die in any other state except in submission to Allah. Don't die except as Muslims. And we may ask ourselves that these are prophets and messengers, the greatest generation, the greatest human beings to ever walk the face of the earth. Their children, many of them prophets and messengers. Their grandchildren and even great-grandchildren, many of them prophets and messengers. Why would they have to remind their children, Allah has chosen for you this religion, do not die except as Muslims? This is not a new problem, this is not a new phenomenon. Even the Anbiya, they had to remind their children. Why? Because they also learned from the previous generations. Nuh alayhi salam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told him, what about his son? Don't even call him your son anymore, because he's not on the same path. He went off the path, he did not accept your message. So they had examples of previous nations, just like you and I have examples before us as well, and in front of our own eyes. But Allah is reminding us for a reason, for a purpose, that if the Anbiya were not safe from this and they had to remind their children constantly, Allah has chosen for you this religion. Make sure you don't just live but also die as Muslims. And the next verse compounds this even more when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أَمْ كُنْتُمْ شُهَدَاءَ إِذْ حَضَرَ يَعْقُوبَ الْمَوْتِ. If you were present at the time when Yaqub alayhi salam was on his deathbed, إِذْ قَالَ لِبَنِيهِ, and he gathered his children around him. Again, this is a very real situation. This is not something we cannot connect to, because this is going to happen to every single person. Allah knows if we'll have the opportunity to speak to our family and our children before we take our last breath. But Yaqub alayhi salam, on his deathbed, he gathered his children around him. And what is that last message that we would give to our own children, our own family? If our children, our grandchildren, everyone's gathered around us on our bed and we know this is my last moment, this is my last day, what would I want to tell them? Perhaps I may remind them, make sure you do X, Y, and Z with the property. Make sure you take the money and you split it like this. Make sure you marry this one and marry that one, and make sure you take care of this and that. We may think of a lot of things that we may want to make sure that we leave our children with. Yaqub alayhi salam, he had one concern, one question to his children when he gathered them around him, and he said, مَا تَعْبُدُونَ مِن بَعْدِ. Who will you worship after I'm gone? Who will you worship after I am gone? Who will you worship when I'm no longer around? In essence, that is what he is saying. Who will you worship when your father is not here to tell you to worship? Who will you worship when I'm gone 9 to 5 at work? Who will you worship when you leave off for college? Who will you worship when you're home all summer by yourself? Who will you worship when you are with your friends hanging out? مَا تَعْبُدُونَ مِن بَعْدِ. Even the greatest of human beings had this concern for their children and their family members and for future generations. Who will you worship? Because it's not enough that you just worship because I tell you to worship. It's not enough that you worship because I'm your father or your mother, or I'm your teacher, or you're here, you come to the masjid every Sunday for 2 hours, and so those 2 hours you're worshiping. But who will you worship when no one is around? And even they needed that reassurance. Over and over they would remind their children, they would remind their families. Every opportunity they got, they wanted that reassurance that this is not just something for me, this is something for all of us. And so what they have taught us, my dear brothers and sisters, what these verses are teaching you and I, is that it is not just enough. قُوا أَنفُسَكُمْ وَأَهْلِيكُمْ نَارًا. Save yourselves and your families from the hellfire. Start with yourself, but it has to go beyond that. It's not enough that I am part of this whole project. I am part of the expansion. What will happen 2-3 generations from now? Alhamdulillah, you're celebrating 40 years. Just last week, one of our old masajid in New Jersey was celebrating 30 years. Some have recently celebrated 50 years. And that's kind of where most, again, are at. But there have been churches around for hundreds of years. And there's synagogues that have been around for 100+ years. Many of them started off quite like this. They all started off small. Then they grew and they grew and they expanded. And now many of them are going in reverse. Closing their door. Selling their property. Actually, a lot of times to the Muslim community. I remember a fundraiser a few years ago for a masjid that was buying a church and had bought the church actually. And the imam of that masjid, he said that when we were signing the contract with the priest to purchase this building, this church of theirs, before he handed me the keys, he said to me, do not make the same mistake that we did. Do not make the same mistake that we did. Get your children involved. Get your children involved. They could never have imagined when they were building that church or that synagogue or that temple that 100 or 200 years from now we will be selling this to the Muslims. They could never, in their wildest dreams, have imagined something like that. No one would ever think that is something that would happen to me. A prophet would never imagine that my own child, that my own wife would be the one to not follow on this path with me. They could never have imagined this. Never take the deen for granted, my dear brothers and sisters. Never take for granted that 2 generations from now, or even 1 generation from now, that it is guaranteed that they would remain upon the religion of Allah Azza wa Jal. It requires work. It requires practice. It requires us having that vision for the future. That while we're building the institutions, alhamdulillah, that we're taking them along with us. We're taking them on this journey with us. We are including them rather in the entire process. That this is going to be your home. This is going to be your facility. You're going to have the keys. If they don't already, what are you going to do with it? It's not just about having a place. It starts with the heart. It starts with cultivating faith in our hearts. It starts with connecting the religion to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not just me and you. Not just because I'm your parent. Not just because I told you. Many of the youth that we talk to who are questioning their faith, almost the number one response every single time is we were always told what to do, but we never were told why. We were told you have to pray. We couldn't question. We were told you have to go to Jumma, you have to fast in Ramadan, but we couldn't really question. The why was never explained to us. And so our attachment to the religion was not to the creator, but to the person telling us. That's why the question, مَا تَعْبُدُونَ مِن بَعْدِي. Who will you worship when your father is no longer around, when your parents are no longer around. Even the Anbiya, they wanted this reassurance, my dear brothers and sisters. Do not take this for granted. Let's start, number one, by even having that vision. It starts with having that vision like Ibrahim alayhi salam. Number two, cultivating faith into our youth and our children, connecting them to the Creator subhanahu wa ta'ala, and teaching and educating them in a proper manner, not just because I was told this so you have to do this, but actually learning the deen. And number three, building these institutions for them so that they have a place, that safe space where they can grow and identify as a Muslim without fearing anyone or anything. And that's where, insha'Allah ta'ala, generations from now will come and will continue on that path. قَالَ وَمِن ذُرِّيَّتِي. Oh Allah, what about the future generations? What about my offspring? That worry, insha'Allah ta'ala, as we depart this earth, we won't have to have that worry at least. That's what about the next generation? I did my part for them, insha'Allah ta'ala. As I'm in my grave, I will reap those rewards and those benefits. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect our children and our youth and our deen and place it in our hearts and allow us to live and die upon Islam. Wa akhiru da'wana an alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله الصلاة والسلام على رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد اللهم بارك على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما باركت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم في العالمين إنك حميد مجيد اللهم أعز الإسلام والمسلمين اللهم أعز الإسلام والمسلمين اللهم أعز الإسلام والمسلمين وأذل الشرك والمشركين ودمر أعداء الدين واحمي هوزة الإسلام يا رب العالمين اللهم اغفر للمسلمين والمسلمات والمؤمنين والمؤمنات الأحياء منهم والأموات إنك سميع مجيب الدعوات اللهم اشف مرضانا ومرضى المسلمين وارحم موتانا وموتى المسلمين اللهم اغفر لنا وارحمنا وأعتق رقابنا من النار وأدخلنا الجنة مع الأبرار يا عزيز يا غفار يا رب العالمين وصل اللهم على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين والحمد لله رب العالمين وأقم الصلاة